Hi, I'm Mike Lardy,
I'm Daniel Mears.
and today is the second part of our series about being relational. And so last week we learned and saw the power of being relational, and as disciples who are following Jesus Christ, we learned that being relational is how we learn and how we grow. And so we saw that two are better than one when it comes to doing missions. And we also saw that the disciples, in the way they related to one another, in the way the early church related to one another, was a powerful way that the world could examine those relationships and how powerful Jesus was working in them. And so we looked at those things last week. With the rest of our time in today's video, Daniel and I are going to show you what it means to be relational.
Yeah, and so we've talked about, for the last 3 weeks, this is the fourth week, two of the biggest keys to discipleship. The first one was being intentional. Second part of this is being relational. And one of the ways right up front when we talk about being relational, something that separates what we do in discipleship versus what you'd see in a normal Bible study or small group, is that we teach differently. And we try to teach in the way that Jesus taught. And if you look through Jesus' life and Jesus' stories, the way he taught was he talked in story form, ways that were understandable. And oftentimes he even spoke in ways that would have been very culturally relevant. Now for us, when we read the Bible, it can be slightly confusing, but back then when he was speaking to these people, they understood farming, they understood crops, they understood animals. And that's oftentimes what Jesus used to explain a biblical or spiritual truth. And so when we teach in a story form. We don't just open the Bible and read 20 verses. We do get to that eventually, but we tell it in a very relational and conversational and powerful way. Because one of the things that we've learned is that through storing that way, people oftentimes retain that information a lot better than going through a Bible study in a traditional way. And then the second piece of real teaching isn't just dumping a story into their lap, but it's asking very specific, very pointed, and very powerful questions. That lead us to the discussions and the conversations we want to have. And one of the beauties of this is you don't have to make this stuff up on your own. This has been a long-term project that we've been working on for about the last year, where we have these stories already written for you. We even have them in audio form so you can hear them. And we have a whole series of very pointed, powerful questions for you to ask relating to the story.
It's good stuff. So you have real teaching taking place inside of relationship. And then the next component that you need for caring for disciples is shepherding. And so shepherding is great. It's needed at every level. For every disciple needs shepherding. And really what it is I compare it to, especially when somebody's young in their faith, they really need a spiritual guide in their life and someone who can care for them, just like an infant would need you to feed them and to love them and to protect them from all the things in the world. That infant needs your care. So too does a spiritual newborn, a spiritual infant need that from you as a spiritual guide, their disciple maker, because they don't realize what kind of a war they've just signed up for. I mean, when you side with Jesus, you enter a war, and they don't know anything about this brand new enemy. They don't know anything about this Satan and all the demonic forces that are with him, and just how powerful they are. And so God has placed you in that disciple's life to be a protector. And so a really great story, I think, about being this spiritual protector and guide and someone who provides care for another is a guy in my group. He's like right on the verge of becoming a Christian, right on the verge of accepting Christ, which is incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
And I love it. But I just go into that kind of protector mode that like gotta swoop in there and pray real extra hard for him, because he's got lots and lots of questions, and just one of those questions could go wrong for him and he might just walk out the door. But early on, I would call him up and say, hey, you're coming to group, right? And I would actually say, hey, well, when am I going to pick you up? And I'd go and put him in the car because I didn't want to leave anything to chance.
Yes.
And now that he's in the group and he's loving it, I'm taking note. Like, he shares about his challenges, and I put all those things in my memory, and then I later at home, I jot them down in my private little prayer journal. And same thing with all the other guys too, when they share about their challenges. And I'm just praying spiritual things over them. I'm just trying to be that good friend and also that spiritual mentor, that guide in their life. And so shepherding is a very relational component of what I do every week.
And this, when you were telling that story, it reminded me of the story of Jesus, who left the 99 to go find the one.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. Picture you're the shepherd of these sheep. and you're watching over them, protecting them, feeding them, and caring for them. Another element of a relational environment or being relational in discipleship is transparency. Now, this is where being relational gets a little bit more difficult for us as group leaders. I think it's fairly easy to tell a story, to ask questions, even to be a protector and to be a shepherd. But to be transparent is totally different. And as a disciple maker, you wonder if being transparent almost makes a statement that you're a hypocrite, because you're telling these people, live this way, yet when you're being transparent and honest about your life, your shortcomings, your failures, your struggles, and your sins, you wonder, well, they're just going to look at me and think I'm a big hypocrite. Well, understand that when you're being transparent, you're actually being the opposite of a hypocrite, because someone who is a hypocrite says one thing and does another, but doesn't seek out any encouragement or help. Someone who's transparent is different from that. They're messing up, they're making mistakes, but they're seeking out help and they're seeking out encouragement. And it's very important as the group leader that you are transparent in your group. Share about your family, share about your life, share about the positives, share about the negatives. Yep. And one of the biggest things you've got to lay right on the table, almost right up front, is your struggles and your sins, because that is going to open up a world of relationship to where people are going to be willing to share about themselves because you first shared. And this isn't something we're just forcing and telling you to do. This isn't synthetic. Jesus did this. Jesus was very open and very, very intentional about sharing the things that were going on in his life. I mean, he shared with the disciples about times when he was encouraged, times when he was discouraged. He went through a whole season of temptations. He went through those very same things that we went through. And oftentimes when Jesus went through those things, what did he do? He got around with 3 of his disciples, 10 of his disciples, 12 of his disciples, and he talked about the things that were going on in his life and in their ministry. And so I just encourage you, if you really want to get to a relational place with your people, you've got to set the example of being transparent.
And so transparency is so necessary, and yet it does really opens the door for one level deeper in terms of the relationship and the environment that you're creating in your group. And so that deeper level is accountability. And really accountability requires that kind of transparency to say, you know what, we're all struggling against our sin nature. We're all in this fight against it. But accountability then turns that corner once there's relationship and trust built, which is why I don't introduce it the first couple weeks of group. But once that trust and that has been established, then you can say things like, okay, we are struggling. Now, how can we help you with it?
Definitely.
And now what can we do about it? How can we fight this thing God's way? And so accountability, I think, is probably one of the most powerful parts of the group once it's healthy and strong. And you can really pull from the Bible story itself. There's elements that come up, like maybe somebody shares their testimony in the story, and then an element of accountability can be, hey, how are you doing at sharing your story? How are you doing at sharing the way that you came to Christ with somebody else? Or maybe it's about prayer. There's somebody offers a prayer in the story, and you talk, well, how is your spiritual discipline of prayer going, and how can we work on that together? I think it's the most powerful part of group once you get it, once it's healthy. And you know what, Daniel and I, we're still learning this.
Yeah, and you know what, accountability, once you get rolling with it, actually will flow incredibly naturally, because as Mike said, it's going to come up in your groups through the stories. Recently, I did the story of the vine and the branches that Jesus taught. Talk about an easy segue into talking and being transparent and being accountable. What is it that you need Jesus to work on in your life? What are the branches that you need to cut off and the branches that need to be pruned? Talk about an easy way to be transparent and then work into accountability of saying, hey, let's work on this together. Hey, I want to encourage you on this. Or hey, I'm going to call you during the week and ask you how this is going so that maybe you can work on cutting that off. And the last thing I want to say to you guys is this, is I want to hold you as a church and as Christ followers accountable. And the way I want to do that is by saying, listen, you know what the mission of Woodlands is to make disciples on this mountain. That's no secret. But an even higher level of that is that Jesus Christ told you as a follower of Christ, go make disciples of all nations. And we've been talking about this. We've been teasing it for months. Now it's happening. The discipleship training is just a few weeks away, coming up at the beginning of March. And so if you really are a follower of Christ and you really want to do what he has told you to do, you should get involved in this training, learn more about discipleship, and let us help you, let us teach you, build a group of people, and begin discipling. And so I want to ask you, fulfill that commitment, hold yourself accountable to the teachings of Christ and to the mission that we have at Woodlands. So with that, have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you guys on Sunday.